Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk, producer and host of the Public Relations Review podcast. When I conceived this program, my idea was to provide public relations practitioners with a wide variety of solid, useful information and guidance from public relations professionals across America. And we are doing that. I will continue to cover important topics such as crisis communications and artificial intelligence and other such important topics. But I will also address other issues such as diversity in public relations, marketing to women, public relations trends, various data concerns, and much more. From time to time, I will also invite vendors of public relations products on to help you better understand how these products can improve your efficiency and your effectiveness. You will learn a lot from our podcast, so thank you for listening, and please inform your colleagues about the Public Relations Review podcast and continue listening. Thank you so very much.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Hello, and welcome to the Public Relations Review and to our listeners in the United States and around the world. Now, today's program is based on an article that happened to be in the Compro.biz newsletter. So, question: how would your organization like to gain a competitive advantage with a specific market segment? This group has nearly 8 million individuals. Now, that's just behind the population of New York City, which is around 8.5 million, and almost twice as many as that inhabit Los Angeles at 3.9 million. Now, of course, these individuals are spread across the United States. So just who are these consistent consumers often overlooked by marketers? Well, this market segment are blind people. So why should companies target them? And how do companies go about creating that competitive advantage? Well, my guest today can provide the answer to these important questions and more. So let me introduce co-authors of the article. And joining me today are David, let me make sure I pronounce this right. Is it Hagenbuch?
We pronounce it Hagenbuch, but that's fine, Peter.
David Hagenbuch is professor of marketing at Messiah College in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. And also Jason Polanski, who is with Microsoft. And Jason has been blind since birth. So David and Jason, the floor is open for you to answer these important questions for our listeners.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Probably the first thing that I would mention as someone that's taught marketing for about 20 years now is we often have people who think of marketing in pretty narrow sorts of ways. And most people, when they think of marketing, they tend to think of advertising or selling, marketing promotion, in other words, and they don't often think of all the other areas of marketing that really are important to an organization, the other P's of the 4 P's. We talk about product, place, promotion, and price, and promotion is just a fourth of that. And oftentimes also with promotion, when people are looking at that, they tend to think of visual types of things, particularly when you think of branding. Probably the first thing that comes to people's mind with branding is a logo or a graphic icon. And those certainly are important to an organization. But one of the things that I've realized over the years as a marketer, both as a practitioner and also someone who teaches marketing, that there's a lot more to a brand than just what we can see visually. There are smells, there are textures of products, there's the product itself and the service that surrounds the product. All those things, all the first things that I was mentioning, the visuals, as important as they might be to those of us that are sighted, they're not that important to people that obviously who can't see them. So that's where it becomes even more important for those that are marketing to blind consumers to take into account the non-visual aspects of a brand and the tactics that involve non-visual types of things. Jason and I wrote this article. We identified 3 other strategies that organizations can rely on that go beyond the visual types of strategies. So those are touch strategies, sound strategies, and smell strategies. Yeah, and we kind of tried to unpack from examples that we've run across, and certainly Jason, as a blind consumer, has experienced firsthand. And Jason, is there one of those that you want to start off with, examples that you've seen from any of the 3, the touch, the smell, or the sound strategies?
Yeah, I would say start out. I'd say one of the smell strategies that kind of comes to mind is how a lot of times when you go into a certain place, when you walk into a certain store, etc., you can kind of tell what it is by how it smells, right? So, clothing stores have their own unique odor. Restaurants, certain types of restaurants, you can kind of have their own unique odor, and oftentimes, as we noted in the article, businesses sometimes have smells that aren't necessarily the most appealing. For example, in an Uber, like the sharing economy, an Uber or Lyft or public transit, sometimes you might smell cigarette smoke, and that's kind of a turnoff. I don't really want to be riding in an Uber where I smell cigarette smoke and it's reaping really strong, right? And especially this affects blind people more because Uber is oftentimes kind of how we get around if we don't have access to other forms of transportation. We're more likely we're a demographic that Uber definitely we're more prevalent. So one of their target demographics of people with disabilities. So it's definitely something that to be mindful of.
Just out of curiosity, right quick, have you approached Uber and or Lyft about this particular issue?
I personally have not, but that's not a bad idea. Might have to find a way to do that.
Well, it certainly does make sense because, as you mentioned, tobacco smoking, I would imagine, first of all, a lot of public transportation, depending upon what that is, do prohibit smoking in their cars. Obviously, it doesn't work on public transportation, but it's probably something that Uber and Lyft might find worthwhile hearing from you guys.
Yeah, the thing that's really interesting about smells is I've read there's been research that's been done that shows some of our strongest memories are connected to smells. And it's interesting. Sometimes you could be out doing something, and all of a sudden you run across a smell that you might not have smelled for 10, 20 years, and suddenly it takes you back, and you can remember the specific location or place where that is. So it's really a powerful memory tool, and it seems like a lot of companies don't use it to its full potential. Like, on the one hand, there's the off-putting smells like we're talking about, and I can think of other ones too. There's a grocery store that I once in a while will visit, and as soon as I walk in the door of that grocery store, there's a smell of meat that is not pleasant. And for me as a sighted person, I kind of get beyond it quickly because I can see the visuals and everything looks fine. But I can imagine for a blind consumer that might be even harder to get around. But we're kind of also in our article looking at the positive aspects of how smell could be used more strategically. And kind of another theme, too, that we ran through our article is that even as these strategies can be helpful for targeting a group that's often overlooked, like blind consumers, who are a significant population, as you mentioned at the beginning, Peter. These strategies can also be helpful in gaining better traction or brand loyalty from all consumers.
From all consumers.
Right, because the same things that appeal to blind consumers in terms of smell and sound and touch will also appeal to sighted consumers. And they're often strategies that are overlooked because the visuals tend to be the low-hanging fruit. That's, well, it's easy to do something visually.
Right.
That's what
it's
people.
kind of the go-to.
Yeah, that's what people tend to think of, and they have to work a little harder to think of how to be effective with the sound, the touch, and the smell strategies. But if they do, they can really be points of differentiation, simply because in a crowded market space, you're looking as an organization to find any possible point of distinction you can, and they can be things that just other organizations aren't thinking about and aren't doing, and can set yourself apart. I don't know. We have Annie Ann's pretzels around us. Do you have those in Nashville?
I believe are these the ones that are sold in the airports?
Yeah.
That's where I
airports
see
and
most
malls
of
and
them.
things
Oh,
like that.
absolutely. I've seen. As a matter of fact, I do like those. Well, mine are the ones that I believe they coated in some form of sugar. That's warm sugary things. I do like those.
Yeah. So they, of course, they have a food product, and in a certain sense, it's easier to work with smell when you're dealing with food. But I'm pretty sure that they do something extra to get that smell out and about in the various venues that they're in, because it hits you almost as soon as you enter, anywhere close to where the pretzels are being sold, and that's a really appealing smell. But even organizations that don't have a smell per se, we talk in the article a little bit about like an office supply store that might have a mild smell of like paper products or things like that that's not particularly strong or appealing. Well, a business like that could pipe in an odor or have something that kind of replaces that smell that would also be an appealing branding factor for them, and also a memory jog for consumers if they happen to come across that smell in another part of life.
Just out of curiosity, have you tried to determine what the market size of the blind population is nationally? How many dollars they represent as a purchasing power?
We haven't.
No, we haven't looked at that beyond just the demographics that you
Population,
mentioned.
right.
That you mentioned at the beginning. I mean, you would think that the dollars spent would be comparable to the normal population, or just to sighted consumers, I should say. They're consuming the same things that everyone else is to a large extent, but there certainly would be some things that are strictly visual that wouldn't be, but on the other hand, probably other things that they'd be using more of, like Jason mentioned, Uber could certainly be. So, yeah, that's a great question. I'd imagine that the dollars would be pretty comparable.
Well, I brought that up simply because once you're approaching someone to encourage them to go after this particular market, the entire context would include, here's the market size and here's how much they spend, and here are ways to attract these people that perhaps you had not thought about in the past.
Absolutely,
Right.
yeah. We approached it from kind of a double-pronged perspective, that it's our article, which, as you said, was shared in Compro, and of course reaching a broad swath of organizations in that, probably most of whom wouldn't naturally think of targeting blind consumers specifically, partly because just the way they're dispersed through the general population. So our strategy in the article was to think more of reasons that these organizations should want to use these strategies not simply to target blind consumers, but also because they'll be effective for the general population as well. But yeah, there probably are some organizations that should look at them more specifically. And we have run across some organizations that seem like, even if they're not doing it in an exclusive type of a way, they definitely are looking at consumers with specific disabilities as a discrete market. One example of that you may have heard of, and this was in the news probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit less, where Starbucks in the Washington, D.C. area opened a new store that is for anybody to shop in, but particularly for
the deaf community.
Yes, for the deaf community. And part of the reason for that was the school is situated within a few blocks of a school for the deaf, so it made sense, given the concentration of deaf consumers near them, to meet the wants and needs of that market. So they've done some really extraordinary things in that store that you can read about in the article. And I do a blog every other week, mindfulmarketing.org, and I highlighted that store in the blog. They have things that, as a person who can hear, we wouldn't naturally think of that would be important, but things like reducing ambient noise so that it doesn't distract from them, and doing things to enhance the ordering. I'm sorry, not the ambient noise wouldn't be a problem for deaf people. I'm doing things that would be helpful visually, that things that we normally might hear, they would do things visually for deaf consumers that would compensate for the lack of hearing. Or actually, the ambient noise could be an issue for people who have partial hearing. So I guess I should maintain that is helpful as well.
Well, let me just add. I'm originally Washington, D.C. is my hometown, and I know specifically it's Gallaudet College that you're referring to. And yes, they've been there for years. Matter of fact, believe it or not, Gallaudet, at least when I was there, they had a football team. And so there was a big bass drum that sort of gave the beat to help them, I guess, is to make the calls. But another thing that I was also aware of was that several years ago, I actually wrote an article about disabilities and how companies were trying to appeal to people. And one of the things I noted in that article was one of the banks, the national banks, had to redo, if you will, reconfigure particularly their outdoor ATM machines. They had to redo that simply because the disabled people in wheelchairs, the wheels would bump up against the wall at some point, so they couldn't quite get to the ATMs to maneuver them, to make them fully functional. So they did this. They've got a lot of exposure in the national newspapers about that, and really it appealed to just the public at large that they thought to do this. And then Walmart, not long after that, maybe a few years ago, were actually featuring folks in wheelchairs in some of their clothing ads, newspaper ads. So those kinds of things, I think companies realize that there are those markets there, and they're doing things to attract people in that market segment into their stores for all practical purposes.
Yes, definitely. And I think I was reading something recently that I think Target is going to have Halloween costumes kind of designed for people who use wheelchairs.
Yeah. The other thing that made me just think of is probably organizations often don't take the time to realize that, like any person, most of us are part of some kind of a group or a family or something like that. So if one person in that unit, that household, that family is excluded, that could mean excluding the whole family.
The whole family, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You think of a restaurant, and if it's not accessible to someone in a wheelchair or not good for someone who can't see or hear or whatever the reason is, then the whole family will probably choose not to go there. So I think organizations, obviously, they're looking. Companies are looking after their bottom lines, which they need to do, but they're smart in realizing that these strategies are win-wins. They're making themselves more accessible in a variety of ways, but they're also helping their bottom lines at the same time, because it's not just the individual who has a disability who they're excluding, but it's potentially all their friends and family and others too who are just concerned and want to support organizations that are proactive and that are trying to do things to make themselves more accommodating for everyone.
Well, I certainly agree with you, and this is why I was thinking that somewhere there's maybe a National Grocery Manufacturers Association or others that you guys might want to pitch giving a presentation to them, because, well, as you know, being in the college, being a college professor, there are organizations where they have call for papers. So maybe at some of these organizations, professional organizations that represent grocery stores or car manufacturers or whatever they are, you might pitch them on presenting this paper to them and letting them hear how introducing these particular strategies could add to the number of unsighted people that they can bring into their shops.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I appreciate you mentioning that. That just reminded me, as you're talking about grocery stores, I think part of the challenge is, and I certainly don't want to suggest that this is happening all the time, because I'm sure it's not, but there's probably plenty of cases where it's people who are designing the strategies for any of these areas of marketing that we've talked about, who are not necessarily ones that have firsthand experience with the challenges that we're talking about, and they would be well served to bring more people on who have experienced them firsthand, not just as consumers, but also like Jason, who has the benefit of both. I mean, he has been a blind consumer all of his life, but also has a business and marketing education. But all of that reminds me of the story you told me recently, Jason, about your experience grocery shopping online.
Yeah.
You should tell that story now.
Yeah. So I do my grocery shopping through an app called Shipt. You may have heard of it. They're connected with the local grocery store where I'm living right now, and one of my favorite things to have. One of my favorite fruits, I should say, to have with my breakfast is fresh pineapple. I like my fresh pineapple, and well, I went on the app to look for it, and usually when I get it, granted I just moved into an apartment a couple weeks ago, and so when I was living at home and what have you, parents would do most of the grocery shopping. I mean, I'd kind of let them know what I wanted, and I had done, grocery shopping on my own before, but I don't know if I had, bought that on my own before, or I had bought it, gone to the store and used the personal shopper and bought it, but I think this was the first time that I had tried to order it online, right? And usually when I get it, it's, the pineapple, it's in a plastic container with a lid on it, it's already cored, and I still cut it up into pieces, but it doesn't have the stem or, the roots or anything on it. It's already cored, skin's taken off, everything. Well, this time when the Shipt driver arrived and, I started to put my groceries away, I realized that I felt something in a bag, and I felt something with roots hanging off of it, and I was like, what is this? And I felt the shape of it, and I was like, oh, is this my pineapple? And I had never, and kind of glad that it happened this way, because I had never seen or felt a pineapple that had never been that wasn't cord in its original form. So I had the experience of seeing what a pineapple looks like before it's prepared in the way that I'm used to having it. Right? So I felt the all the roots coming off of it, and the kind of felt like rather some long leaves, and like the kind of the I understand, I guess, why it's called a pineapple, because the skin around it felt kind of, it almost felt like a tree, and I kind of had that experience, and
yeah, so
I had never had that experience before.
So it just made me wonder when he told me that story if there was something on the website that they're relying
there
on.
wasn't really a description that was thorough, that said that it wasn't cord. And next time maybe I'll have to try to do a better search and type in cord pineapple, or see what I can find.
Well, chances are the website was relying on the visual, which is fine for people who are sighted, but for someone that can't see that it's a whole pineapple, that doesn't help them. And even if there was alternate text or something, it probably just said pineapple.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't necessarily know that. So yeah, so that's just an example. I thought that was really in keeping with what we're talking about.
Well, that example is pretty common in other areas, because advertisers do it as a whole, because unfortunately a lot of times the larger advertising agencies who do particularly either citywide or statewide or nationally, they don't have an inclusive staff. That is part of the problem. So you run across people, you have people trying to plan something that has cultural, that's completely different from theirs, some physical experiences that they have never had before, trying to plan things. And you've probably run into them or heard about them. Give you an example. This was some years ago when they were having, I believe it was Super Bowl in Detroit. And they had no Motown music there. I said, what? So the wheels were beginning to come off of that, because how can you go into a town that's known for music across and around the world and have no members from that particular community performing at Super Bowl? So those kinds of things have happened any number of times. Or you've got a bunch of folks planning for an event that includes that's intended to include Hispanic people, but there's nobody Hispanic at the table. So I certainly understand what the problem is, and this sounds to me as though it gives you a platform to talk about how to get more organization to engage in making sure we talk about inclusivity and diversity as a whole. That would include everybody, to make sure that those kinds of mistakes aren't made.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I think you're right on top of it in terms of it's a broader issue, even beyond disabilities. It's culture, language, part of culture, of course. It's the same sort of issue. By the way, Peter, there was one positive thing about that Super Bowl. And that's that the Pittsburgh Steelers won that Super Bowl in Detroit. I just have to mention that.
Okay. Well,
I remember that Super Bowl well.
Okay. Now you'd mentioned a couple of other things, touch and sound. Have you run across any sort of distinctive areas where sound would perhaps be of benefit to marketers?
Absolutely. Sound might be in a lot of ways the cutting edge, the way that could get more marketers than any interested in this. You think of everything that's happening now with artificial intelligence and smart speakers, which are so reliant on smell and on
sound.
On sound. I'm still back on smell. On sound. And how and a lot, I know Jason has mentioned to me how a lot of these new devices have been very helpful for him. There also are certain things that we've run across, read about, and we talk a little bit about in the article, something called sound signatures, where with all the devices using sound now, there is more and more of a need for organizations to try to differentiate themselves by a sound, so that when people hear a distinct sound, they think of the organization. It's tied to that organization. So it could just be like a series of notes that are distinct. And some of that's been going on for decades. You think of like Southwest Airlines and the kind of ding ding. I can't do justice to it, but you know, you're free to move about the cabin, and the phrase that follows that. So or the you know, chime from Apple products when you log into a device, a MacBook or something like that. So it's interesting. We hear those, and you know, we know, oh, someone is, you know, doing this. They've just turned their laptop on, or they just got an email, a text message, or something like that. So we know those very well as consumers, but yet a lot of organizations haven't thought of how to use those in a more strategic way. But some are doing it, and people are writing about it. And again, it's this idea of a sound signature that that is becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah, and one of the examples that we used in our article relates to hybrid cars. That you know, a lot of times hybrid cars are so quiet that, you know, blind person walking on the street can't always hear them, and so a sound signature, what we were thinking would be able to do is it would not only would it allow you know, blind pedestrians to better hear that particular car, but maybe it could have a certain sound that's a little bit more unique than anything else, that any other car that you would hear, to kind of differentiate itself and promote that brand, you know, to all consumers. And, you know, sighted people, oftentimes, you know, they listen for cars too. I mean, so I think doing something like that, not only would it help blind consumers, but it would differentiate, if they could find, you know, really innovative ways to do it, you know, differentiate that particular brand of a hybrid car from others, and maybe each one could kind of have, you know, its own sort of unique sound. You know, the Chevy Volt could sound slightly different than the Prius, or what have you, and the sound that they would, the sound signature that they would let out, you know, as they would pass by, would kind of differentiate it and give it its own way of branding.
Yeah, it's kind of just another reason or another avenue for marketers to endear themselves or endear their products to consumers, because just like we like pleasant smells or things that are visually appealing or that feel nice, we also like cool sounds. So if a car company especially, but you can imagine it for all sorts of companies, if they have a cool sound, then that's just another thing that can be stored in memory to connect us to the brand, but also another reason, small reason, but a reason for liking
that product.
Yeah.
Well, I think you guys have made a compelling case, actually, for others reaching out not only to the unsighted, as we mentioned here, but to other, or it presents other opportunities for folks to do some additional marketing as well. You know, with smell, for instance, unique smells to their particular entity, whether it's a coffee shop or restaurant or maybe even a clothing store, and sound and touch and so forth and so on. So, and the fact that you guys have an opportunity to present this information to large organizations or associations that could inculcate this into helping their entities or members do a better job of reaching the unsighted and perhaps others as well.
Yeah, we appreciate your encouragement to do that, and that would be a wonderful thing for us to keep working on. And it's exciting to hear of others' interest in that and seeing the value of that. We really appreciate it.
Well, I certainly appreciate both David, both you and Jason for joining me today. And I will. This program will be uploaded to. I think we've got 11 sites that carry us, and we will also send you a copy of it for your files to use. However you see best. And I'd certainly like to thank you again for joining the Public Relations Review, and again thanking all of the listeners for taking the time to listen.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Great. Have a good day, and we'll communicate with you soon.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.